The reality that I truly subscribe to is what's best for the company is also what's best for the person. And that may not be something that the person sitting in front of you believes in this moment, particularly if they're in a disciplinary moment, they're not going to believe that, but it's the truth.
Introducing Checkwriters, a video podcast for people who want to help their employees, colleagues, and organizations flourish and succeed. I'm your host, Dakota Hebert, Chief Marketing Officer at Checkwriters. Along with my co-host, HR Manager Felicia, we'll hear from business leaders and pros who share captivating stories from their respective industries. Join us as we uncover their strategies and get unique inspiration for building great processes and experiences at your own organization. Check out and subscribe to Checkwriters on Apple, YouTube, or wherever you listen and watch your favorite shows. Thanks for watching. Have you ever left a conversation thinking, wow, that escalated quickly? Amber Stockham, Senior Director of HR Programs at NBOA, has made mastering the art of difficult conversations a centerpiece of her HR career. Join us on this episode of Checkwriters to hear Amber unlock these independent school mysteries. Why mastering difficult conversations is the key to HR success. How to walk the line between being human and being HR. Why HR should be upfront about the worst aspects of a job opening, and why she doesn't buy the phrase quiet quitting and what she says it's really saying about your culture. All right, Amber Stockham, thank you so much for joining us on the Checkwriters podcast this morning. I wanted to talk about mastering employee conversations.
Oh, we're jumping right in.
We are, yeah. We're going for the big question. So you've mentioned that being able to read people and read situations was something that you developed early on in your career. So why do you think that is so important, and how has that helped you succeed in working in human resources?
When you're in human resources, one of the jokes I tell is you see the best and the worst of people. The people sitting in front of you often are literally having the worst day of their life to that moment. And sometimes they're having the best day. They're there to tell you that they're going out on maternity leave or something like that, but that's often not the reason they're there. So being able to read where they are, what they're feeling, and more importantly, what they're telling you and whether or not that's true, is a really good place to start in HR. Being able to read people helps you move to the next level of being able to say, why don't I offer some resources for you? Here are some things that I can tell you that may help you, because people aren't used to trusting their employer, and that is completely rational in this day and age. But it means the person in front of you, even if they're telling you the truth, it's probably not the whole truth, they don't fully trust you. So you need to be able to take it the extra couple of inches, figure out exactly where they are and what they're really saying to you when they say, well, I think my husband's sick. Okay, that probably means more than he has the flu today. We need to have a conversation. Mm-hmm.
So to your point about people coming to HR, I feel like there are so many things where it's like, never trust HR. Don't tell HR anything. And it always is so upsetting when I see that, because it's like, at the end of the day, I'm not, for the company or for the employee necessarily. Like, I'm here to help everybody. Right. And the company or the school isn't successful unless the employees are successful. That's right. So besides kind of getting on that level of where they're feeling, what else do you do to kind of help build that trust so that employees know, hey, you can actually go to HR in this particular situation for help with this need?
So after I left a job, probably 5-6 years ago, I remember befriending one of the people who was there. And one of my rules is I'm not friends with the employees when I'm HR, because you can't be. You need that professional boundary. And she looks at me and she goes, why didn't I know you were fun before now? And that's because I was your HR director. Mm-hmm. I can't be that person. You have to be somebody who is pleasant. You have to be somebody that they know and they trust and they see as human without having all of the dimensions of being human. So it was kind of a joke. Like, my coworkers knew that I gardened and I had a dog, and they really didn't know much more than that about me. But that's what you do. That's the disarming part. They know a little bit about you. They know that you're human. You're not terrifying. They don't know enough to start making judgments about you. And that's a really hard line to walk at our job, particularly in this day and age where we treat our job as a second home. And being able to have those moments with the employees where you are one-on-one and a real person is important before you get into those rooms where the difficult conversations are happening. Being able to make sure they know that you are on their side. And the reality that I truly subscribe to is what's best for the company is also what's best for the person. And that may not be something that the person sitting in front of you believes in this moment, particularly if they're in a disciplinary moment, they're not going to believe that, but it's the truth. We don't want to hate our lives. You spend at least 8 hours a day at your job. If you are miserable, it's probably not where you want to be. I don't think everyone has to love their job. Everyone doesn't have to absolutely adore what they do and wake up every morning with a song in their heart to go to work, but you probably shouldn't hate it either. You should be good coming to your job. You should be good doing what you do and know that what you do either makes a difference in the lives of other people or at least in your own life. And if that's not the case, then helping someone find something that they can do that they will enjoy, whether it's at the same company or not, is the right thing for them. I truly believe that what's right for a company is what's right for the employee almost all of the time. Mm-hmm. And so going in knowing that that's my baseline helps me connect with employees. I used to have a facilities director who laughed at me because I had more than one person give me a hug after I had fired them. And he thought it was hilarious, but it's because I treated them like people. Mm-hmm. I treated them like people who had a life and who clearly needed something else, but I tried to help them find that. I would offer to give them what reference I could. I would offer to help them find another job if I could. And I had people come up to me years later and thank me because they did find something they were better at or that they enjoyed more. And that's kind of what HR is about. HR is not about being the disciplinarian. HR is not about making sure that everything goes smoothly with the employees. It's about making sure that the employees are actually invested in what they're doing. If they're not invested, then they're not going to be doing it really well. It's about making sure you've got the right people in the right seats and they're invested.
Yeah. And to your point, I can agree. HR is lonely. Like it's tough because you can't have friends all the time. And our general counsel, Megan, she always says, she's always saying, oh, people really trust you with a lot of things. Uh-huh. She's like, I'm so surprised that they would disclose that to you. There must be something trusting about your nature. But I think part of that also comes with keeping certain things confidential.
That's right.
Right? So when employees come to you and when managers come to you, keeping things confidential. So what kinds of things, for you as an HR professional, do you keep confidential when employees or managers come to you? Because obviously there's a line there. There's certain things you have to disclose and certain things that should be confidential. So where's that line for you?
My general rule is it's probably, if it's important enough to tell me, it's important enough to tell the CEO. So I always, when someone sits down with me and tells me something important, the next thing I say is, can I share this with our CEO? I'm not going to share this widely, but can I share it with the people who can help you and who kind of need to know? And usually they're okay with that. Sometimes I've had people say, can I share it instead? And that's just fine. But I make sure they know where that line is. Confidentiality means I'm not telling everyone, but I am telling the people who need to know. And I think it's really important in HR to never tell a lie, even a white lie. Make sure they know who you're going to tell, what you're doing with the information that they're giving you, and how much they can trust you with. I try to tell them as early in a conversation as possible because Many conversations with employees that are that serious start off with, well, I don't want anyone to know, or
I don't want anyone to get in trouble.
that's
but
right. That's right.
Yeah.
I don't want them to know it was me. Well, if you're the only person who witnessed it, I'm sorry. They know it's you.
Yeah.
That's how this
Yeah.
is going to work. And I try to be very upfront about that. But confidentiality is important, and only sharing what needs to be shared with the people it needs to be shared with is one of the keys to really being able to earn trust.
Yeah.
I wanted to go back to something you said a little earlier on, Amber, about keeping that boundary between, I'm not your friend, I'm the HR director. Kind of reminded me of it's almost like why was the Queen of England so beloved? It's because she always kept that boundary. People were kind of like, you're definitely above us, but we still feel connected to you in a way. I'm wondering how should managers then relate to their teams? What sort of distinction do you need to maintain with that? Because you do have managers who are kind of like, yeah, I'm your friend, I'm one of you, let's hang out, but it might create issues when you need to say, okay, but there are boundaries to that.
That's right. And I think it's very similar. They shouldn't know everything about your life. Like, as their manager, they need to know that you're human. They should know you have a family. If you had a really rough morning, maybe you can tell them that. They shouldn't know just how rough.
Yeah.
There are boundaries. And I think that's the key. I used to have many, many, many years ago, I had a manager who, when we would have after work, we'd all go out for a drink. She always wanted to join us. And I kind of had to pull her aside once and go, but it's not really appropriate. That's our time and not your time. Mm-hmm. And you have your team for that. As a manager, you have your team for that. But when the employees are bonding, that's their time. I used to, when company holiday parties, things like that, that is not the time anyone wants to see HR. HR's asked to be there, but it is not the time anyone wants to see HR.
Yeah.
No one is comfortable having a drink with HR standing next to them.
Sorry, Felicia. You're going to be standing behind the Christmas tree this year.
Like I said, very lonely.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because actually...
Well, they always say that, don't they? It's lonely at the top.
Thanks. No, but actually, it's funny you say that because I feel like there's so many times at our Christmas party where with our new, and again, this is just my experience, but with our new employees, I'm usually one of the first people that they know. I'm the one that they eat lunch with on the first day, that talks to them for the first few weeks on a pretty regular basis. And so then when we're at those company events, a lot of times everybody does come and talk to me.
Yeah.
All the new folks?
Yeah, they usually do. So,
until they get new friends.
That's right.
Exactly. Until they get new friends. And then they're like, oh, okay.
Yeah, she's HR.
Until they listen to this podcast and they're like, oh, I'm supposed to stay away from her.
So how do you then kind of forge a relationship? What are the other ways that you can relate to your employees and your team with maintaining those boundaries? Because you're going to need that, especially in HR, to have those conversations. You're going to need to know them a little bit, or at least know how to relate to them.
Right. Go to lunch, listen to them. One of the things that makes a really great HR person is a good listener. Go to the lunchroom, sit down, listen to them, really hear them. You don't have to share a ton of opinions. If you're asked a question, answer it. But listen to what everybody's going through. When I joined my school, we were a residential school. We had a residential component, and I had never dealt with that. In more than 15 years of experience, I had never dealt with having employees live on the property before. And it's a very different dynamic, and I couldn't understand it. So I would go to the residential meetings, and I'd sit with the residential folks, and I'd chat with them about what their summers were like. What's it like when the kids aren't on campus? What's it like when, nothing's going on campus? Holidays must be lonely, right? And I'd find out, and I realized I still didn't understand their job, so I volunteered for a job where I would work Friday and Saturday nights, kind of keeping the trains running and all of the buses moving for the kids. And it is life-changing to be thrown into a role like that.
Yeah.
But I think you need to be able to form those relationships, and they start trusting you when they see that you're willing to kind of jump into the trenches and see what their role is really like.
That's kind of what we were talking about before, though. Doing the roles that, never would be expected of a manager or an executive gives you a whole new outlook on what it's like. Because you can say, what's wrong with that? Putting the kids on the bus, for example.
Yeah.
That must be easy, right?
That's got to be easy, right? Until you're trying to remember the names of 42 kids that just got on the bus.
Yeah. I can't remember the names of my own kids, so I can't imagine 40. But yeah, that's great. That makes a lot of sense.
I just have a funny story about buses. So prior to working in HR, I worked as a teacher, and I was a 5th grade teacher. And so at my school, 5th grade was the youngest grade. It was 5th through 8th grade. So the 5th graders were still babies, where, not actually, but, to me, they were still my babies. And where most schools, 5th grade is the oldest. And so it was the first day of school, and I had this one student, and I will never forget, he insisted he was supposed to get on a particular bus. And I said, no, you're not. You're supposed to get on this bus. And of course, it's the first day of school. Everybody's out there. Everybody's trying to go everywhere. Nobody knows where they're going, and he insisted he was supposed to go on this bus, and we were trying to contact the bus company and his parents to get him on the right bus, because for some reason nobody could figure it out. And the bus ended up leaving without him. And he, bless his soul, he ran after that bus down the driveway after the bus. And there I was right behind him, running after him, yelling at him to come back. And in front of the entire school and all of the other 5th graders through 8th graders. And so, yeah, it's really stressful getting kids on and off a bus.
So what was his bus?
Honestly, I think they had messed up where he had he went to the wrong bus stop. So he got on the wrong bus. So the bus I was trying to put him on was the correct bus, but it was not the bus that he took to school because he went to the wrong bus stop.
Yeah.
So,
isn't it funny how kids are like that, though? Like when they are like insisting on it.
yes.
It's like there's nothing more important in the world. It's like do or die.
Exactly.
Right.
You
And
need
then-
to get on that bus.
And then
That's
the
right.
bus, and then the
That's
fact that they
important.
left, which is a nightmare for me.
I thought you were going to say that you face planted while running after him.
I
thought that's where it was going.
That has happened to me several times.
Because didn't you say that you did that on your driveway, your own driveway? Yeah.
Yes, I ran after my 3-year-old,
Yeah.
and I face planted. But anyways,
Another item I wanted to get into, Amber, was employee benefits, because I saw something that you wrote a couple months ago where you had a situation where you were just overwhelmed with the healthcare benefits and
Yeah.
billing process and all of that. I was glad to see that everything worked out
It
well for
did.
you. Yeah, that's good. But you were kind of saying, like, I've been in this industry for decades and dealing with healthcare and benefits for employees and the billing and all of that. And you were saying, I consider myself very well versed in this stuff. And I was completely overwhelmed, shell shocked. The things coming in, couldn't make sense of
Yeah.
it. And you just wanted to point out, like, HR, this is overwhelming for your employees, and we need to like think about this when we're talking with them and trying to educate them about benefits. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So at that point, I had an accident, and I had an ambulance ride, the usual that happens when you have an accident, and I was fine afterward. But as I said, I've been doing this for decades, and I had no idea what to expect when those bills started rolling in. I knew to be nervous about an ambulance ride. I knew that that's a red flag.
Yeah.
But I know how to read those documents. I've been interpreting those documents for employees for a very long time. And in reading the documents, I still didn't quite know what those bills were going to look like for me. And it occurred to me sitting there that for all the times I have sat in my office with employees on the phone with our benefits providers, trying to make sure that they were getting the benefits that they deserved and that they understood why the benefit was being denied, if it was being denied, or why they needed to jump through another hoop, that I had never really understood their emotional situation at that time. It's a very vulnerable place to be when you've just had something very medically intense happen to you. And then to start having these bills roll in that you don't really understand. And yeah, HR explained it to you 6 times every year because you've got to sign off that HR has explained it every year, but you weren't really listening. You were setting up your classroom for the first time of that year. And who actually wants to listen to HR talk about open enrollment benefits? And I think
I know.
it's
I always say
important.
my eyes glaze over with that conversation. So
Yeah.
what do you actually? I know Felicia's kind of like rolling her eyes at that too, because it might be a point of frustration for you also sometimes.
I do have to tell Dakota what to do for
But-
health insurance.
Yeah.
But what sort of things can HR do, and what have you done over your career to kind of interest employees in that sort of thing? Or maybe hey, they're never going to be interested, but at least I can get through these items in
That's
this
right.
way.
Talk about the things that are relevant to them in the moment. Like, they are not going to understand ambulance benefits until the moment when they truly need to.
Right.
But if you're explaining their HSA to them in terms that they'll understand, like, if you save enough money in this, you can invest that money. It gives you money back. That's when they start listening.
Mm-hmm.
When you start talking about the fact that their HSA can be a retirement plan if they do it right, or that their FSA that they, completely ignore, it can pay for their kids' summer camp, that's when they start paying attention. So meet them where they are.
Mm-hmm.
Stop trying to tell them what they're going to need to know in an emergency, because they're not going to get it. And make sure they know how to contact you when that emergency happens. And instead, meet them where they are. Talk about the things that are relevant today. Then they stop glazing over.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I find that too, generally with anything, right? Like, you don't really know about it until you have to know about it, right? So it's like, yes, I know that I've told employees this certain things so many times, but until it happens to them, that it wasn't relevant.
That's
so
right.
So they didn't care. It's not that they weren't paying attention, but it wasn't relevant.
That's
so
right.
it went in and went out. And
We're all busy people. Mm-hmm. We get up every morning and we care about the things we have to care about that day.
yeah,
And that's not on the list.
until it unfortunately ends up on the list.
That's right.
And then back to those hard conversations where your employees are coming to you and telling you about this medical issue that happened, and
That's right.
there's that matter of confidentiality. Maybe they're going to be looking at like a possible paid medical leave, which, then you have to loop in a manager and things like that. So it kind of relates back into a difficult conversation, possibly.
Mm-hmm.
And having their trust, because one of the things that I tell our managers all the time is you can't control their history. An employee sitting in front of you because another employment opportunity didn't work out, the odds are really good they've got a bad history with an employer somewhere. You can't control their history. All you can do is control their experience with you. So they may actually trust HR more than their manager, or vice versa. You need to find the person at the company that they trust the most and start there and make sure that they're confiding in the right person, and that person's immediately saying, you know what, there are a couple of other people who need to be looped in. And making sure that it's only the couple of people who need to be looped in. Managers with loose lips do a lot of damage, and making sure that that's not happening is really important as an HR director. But when you have that tough conversation, ask the right questions. Ask them to be more specific. Make sure you use silence. I use silence a lot in those conversations. When you keep talking, when you keep interrupting, they shut down. They don't feel like they have to do the work, and you're not getting the information that you need to do your job. When you say things like, can you tell me more? Or, I'm not sure I understood that. Can you rephrase it for me? Then you start getting more information from them. You start getting the information that you're really looking for. One of the things I like to tell folks is, but makes them defensive and makes them tell you more. Can you tell me more? Yes, it was this and it was more. Can you tell me more about that? Can you let me know what else was going on at the time? I tell managers, take notes when you're in those conversations. And don't just take notes about what was said, but take notes about what was going on around you at the time. Was it a snow day? Was it a day that was absolutely crazy because the flowers were being dropped off for commencement? Because those are the things that are going to help you remember that conversation in a year and a half when you have to remember it, as opposed to, oh yeah, they said these exact words. You're not going to remember that.
I love that. It reminds me of my mom always says to me, say what you need to say and then be quiet.
That's right.
Which is hard for me sometimes.
Your mom is so wise.
Yeah.
But I'm curious. So you talk about managers, and you said sometimes managers have loose lips, which can be challenging. That's a challenging conversation for HR. When you have to talk with other managers or other leaders at a company, it's a totally different conversation than having to talk with employees.
Yes.
So how do you manage those, especially when it's a manager that might have a longer tenure than you or might be above you in terms of the hierarchy of the organization? How do you manage those situations?
In my experience, a regular employee is a lot more likely to trust you than a manager. A manager thinks HR is coming in to take over. A manager thinks HR is telling them they're doing a bad job. And in some cases, that might be true. In other cases, it's you're a resource for them. So you can start by gaining managers' trust by being a resource for them. Depending on the size of the organization, HR can start by just scheduling, 15 minutes every month with each manager and go to them. Don't make them come to you. Go to them and say, I just wanted to check in. How are things doing? I know you had someone who was out on FMLA. How are things going now that she's back? Oh, I hear you've got a new employee. How are things working out? Is there anything I can do? And really being a resource for them so that they're not as defensive about you coming in. And they're a lot more likely to open up if you say, hey, I hear there's a problem. Why don't you tell me about the problem and maybe I can help? Because that's the key. And if a manager has messed up, which it happens, every manager is promoted because they are good at what they do, not because they're good at supervising employees. And suddenly they are supervising employees. So those mistakes happen. Make sure that they understand what they should have done, but also what the consequences are. And don't just tell them, make them live it with you. A manager that has had to go to unemployment hearings, a manager that has had to sit with the attorney, they're a lot less likely to repeat those mistakes.
That's a good point.
Yeah, that's really good advice, to meet with the management team on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah, I like meeting with them. I like making sure that they know I'm a resource. And managers are busy. They're not likely to come to my office, even if they know they need help. They don't have time. But if I go to them and say, hey, I booked 15 minutes, do you need anything? They'll open up, usually.
Amber, let's talk a little bit about your own career, because you've obviously gained a wide body of experience as you're talking about these things. So you were the HR director at Miss Hall's school.
Yes.
For 6+ years, and now you're the director of HR programs at NBOA, the National Business Officers Association, dealing with a lot more than just one school. For nearly 5 years, you've been in that role. So what do you think are the biggest differences between those two roles?
I'm no longer a practitioner, but I am still a resource. So in HR, you're a resource first and foremost, but you also have to kind of get down in the trenches and take care of the problems. I don't get to do that for our schools anymore. I have to actually just be a resource and be a very honest resource. Let them know when they're probably in over their heads and this call should have been made to their attorney. But more importantly, let them know what I would do in those positions and why that may or may not be relevant. I work with over 1,400 schools around the world. They are all very different, and they all have very different backgrounds and expectations of their employees and expectations of their management teams. And what I might do might not be right for them. So I can say, here's what I would do, but I can also follow that up with, and that may not be what's right in your culture. Every single school has its own culture, and that's what I've had to learn, is they're so different, every school is. And whether it's the size of the school or the students that they're teaching or the culture of the employees at the school, everybody's going to respond differently. And I can just give them some reasonable advice.
Yeah. Do you ever find that you ever try to, for lack of a better term, embed yourself in their culture so that you can give, are there any, or do you find that they're more like typically surface questions where you don't have to get too deep? Because what does their role actually look like?
If they're calling me, the odds are we are long since past surface.
Oh, yeah.
So most of the time I need to have a basic understanding of their culture. I do a training on how to train your supervisors. So I will actually do a school's training for their supervisors and do like a level set for them. And then the school can continue on from there, really digging into the cultural elements that set them apart. But to do that training, I will have a conversation with the leadership at the school. And I start out that conversation not by asking about their HR policies, but by saying, what's it like to work at your school? What's it like to teach at your school? What are the best moments in a teacher's day? What are the worst moments in your administrator's day? Let's find out what it's actually like, because that's where the culture lies. And that's where I'm going to get a better understanding of, number one, why they've called me, what the problem is that they're solving for, but also what is going to connect with their folks, with their supervisors at their school. What's going to connect with them, what's going to make them feel like they can trust the things they're learning in this training. And that's ultimately where this goes. I need to understand their culture. I don't necessarily need to agree with everything that they have in place. Every single school is going to have different policies that I may or may not put in place if I were their HR person. But I need to understand why they've put it there. And I need to be able to meet them where they are.
Yeah. And how does that work for recruiting and retaining employees?
When you're recruiting employees, it goes back to HR should never tell a lie. You should tell them the best parts of working at the place. You should also tell them the worst. No one should ever walk into a new employment and then realize there are a lot of things they don't know that they probably wanted to know before they walked in.
Oh, yeah. It's like buying a house.
Yeah.
But they never tell you the bad things about buying a house.
No. You should know about the infestation before you buy the house.
Right.
That's what home inspections are for.
You should also tell them about all of those beautiful inlaid floors.
Yeah.
But make sure it's not a surprise. Make sure that because I work with schools, I automatically say schools, but make sure that whatever company you're with, whatever school you're with, that if you're facing challenges, new people coming in know that, and they know what you're doing to address it, because that's the and part of the sentence. Here's what just happened, and here's how we're addressing it. And making sure that they see that you're proactive, that you're being honest with them, and that you're looking to make your workplace a better place. And hopefully that was one of the considerations in recruiting them. When you're recruiting people, they should be adding to your culture. We talk about this a lot. They should be a cultural add. They shouldn't be a cultural fit. When you're bringing someone new in, you should be bringing them in because they can do something wonderful for your organization, not because they're going to maintain the status quo. Mm. And I think that's really important when you're reaching out. Know who you're looking for and know how you're going to reach them, and then be really honest with them when you've got them sitting in front of you and you're selling the school to them. Because we love to talk about the fact that they need to sell themselves to us. We need to sell our own organization to them when we're recruiting.
Yeah.
I say that all the time. I am always selling.
Yeah.
Every single interview.
Yeah, if they're not on board for your organization, they're not the right people. It doesn't matter what their skill set is. I love to talk to schools and they'll say, well, I want the best and the brightest. Okay, but the best for you is not the best for the school down the street. And you need to know that. You're probably not necessarily a direct competitor. You're looking for different people. And so know who's best for you, who fits in. Look around your campus, see who is thriving on your campus and ask why. And then look for those folks.
Yeah. It's a good point. Amber, it seems like every couple months we have like a new buzzword for in HR world and employment world. And this is one that, I mean, this has been around for almost a year now, I feel like. Quiet quitting.
Oh, yes.
And we've all heard this phrase, generally referring to employees doing the, quote, bare minimum of their job and not going above and beyond. And I have read your take on this. And I want to know, why do you think we should not be labeling this phenomenon quiet quitting? Why should we call it, as you say, working to rule instead?
Working to rule is what I learned it was in school a long time ago. But when you think of it that way, you're also reframing the conversation as you asked them to do a job. This is not their life. It's not your life. You go home at the end of the day. Why do you assume they're not going home at the end of the day to their own life? So if you're asking them to do a job, ask them to do the job. And if you gave them a poor description of the job, that's on you, not them. So tell them what you're really looking for from them, and then give them the motivation to do that. And I say that knowing that for most people, that's interpreted as pay them a higher salary, but that's not necessarily true. Motivation comes from a lot of things. Motivation comes from intrinsic elements of the job, wanting to do it well. It can come from a higher salary. It can come from knowing that there's something at the end of this for them, a possible promotion. Whatever you're using to motivate them, make sure that the motivation is matching the job that you're asking them to do. But when you're saying, well, I'm going to pay you minimum wage and you have to come in for 40 hours a week and you're not allowed overtime. If you work an extra 15 minutes, then we're going to write you up for that. Oh, what? You weren't excited about being here? Really? Well, that's just awful. This must be quiet quitting. I mean, do you hear the hypocrisy?
Yeah.
Let's talk about what we're actually using to motivate people. Let's talk about why we want people to behave in a certain way and why we want them to do elements that maybe aren't written into their job description, and should they be? Schools are notorious for this. Our schools are terrible about it. My school was terrible about it. I was terrible about it when I was there. Mm-hmm. We want people to act like they live the job. And at the end of the day, they don't. They have to go home to their kids and their dog and the craziness that is their life. Mm-hmm. And we have to acknowledge that. If we don't, we lose people. And we start seeing this quiet quitting, work to rule, and being disconnected from the job. And those are the people you're going to lose in the next 3 years because they're already looking. They just don't know it yet.
I like that phrase, work to rule, because
I hadn't heard that before.
Well, as a public school teacher, obviously a little different, but same types of struggles. Mm-hmm. When teachers are negotiating their contracts,
that's right.
That's what they do. It's called work to rule, and I never was part of this in my particular district, but they only do the things that are outlined for them in their contracts,
that's
which
right.
To like an organization is a job description. And so that makes me think about all of the teachers right now that are leaving the field. Of course, myself, although four years ago included. What are some strategies that you've implemented in the schools that you've worked with to retain those teachers, especially those good teachers?
Mm-hmm. Remind them why they're teaching. Because while they need to be able to live on the salary, no teacher has ever gone into it for the money. Remind them why they're teaching. One of the things that I tell folks is when you send out an offer letter to a third grade teacher, that third grade teacher's offer letter shouldn't say, we're inviting you to teach third grade at our school for the X school year. It should say, our third graders are thrilled to invite you to be their teacher next year. Because that's why someone wants to be a third grade teacher. They want to connect with kids. They want those kids to matter to them. They want to matter to those kids. They want to make a difference in the world. So remind them of that and make sure you're giving them the opportunity to do that. That's one of the legs up that our independent schools have that the public schools can't give them. Because in public school, it's very regimented these days. They've got to teach exactly the same thing. They've got to teach it the same way to make sure that the kids are going to pass all of the tests they need to pass. You have a lot more flexibility in independent schools, and we should be reminding them of that. We should be reminding our teachers that they can teach the way that they want to, in the way that feels right to them, so that they can connect with the kids. That's what you remind them of.
Yeah.
Amber, what are some of the challenges schools are facing as we get into the 24-25 school year?
Oof. Well, we do have a lot of turnover still. I think one of the biggest challenges that they're facing is actually the kids lost some skills during the pandemic that still aren't back. And one of those skills seems to be patience. We've lost some social skills, and not just our students. I hear a lot of folks say the biggest challenge in the classroom is the parents. So I think there's some grace that needs to be given in our classrooms these days and with our parents, and making sure that we're connecting our families and our employees. It's not just the faculty and staff, but also the families to the mission, and making sure that everybody's actually on board with why we're here. When you're having a difficult conversation with an employee, always start with why you're here. I always start with the thing that we all have in common, which is we're all here because we want the best for the students. And so let's start there, and then we can have the conversation about why that behavior you exhibited yesterday probably wasn't the best for the students. But we start there, and that's where our schools need to be starting this year. They need to level set on what the mission is, why we're all here, and why we're all on board with that. And it helps to start with the employees and give them some resources. Give your teachers resources so that when they're having that conversation with parents, they know how to have that conversation with the parents. They can say to the parents, hey, I realize that John's having a lot of difficulty in class right now, but we're all here for the same reason. We all want the best for him. Here's the outcome we're looking for by the end of the year. So let's sit down and have a chat about how to get him there. That's the big one.
Yeah. I feel like that's so important, especially with independent schools, is to really remind the parents also, like, hey, we're all in this together. We all believe in this school and our mission and our vision for this student and the school. Let's work together on it.
And when you're having a difficult conversation, you can't ignore power dynamics. There are always power dynamics in the room. And if that's HR having a conversation with an employee, that's a pretty clear-cut power dynamic. But when you're sitting there as a school administrator and having a conversation with a parent, those power dynamics are a little muddled. That parent's paying money to have their kid there, but you also have the power to say their kid's not allowed to be there anymore, right? Like, there's some really complex dynamics going on. And as a result, that conversation can get out of control pretty fast. It's about really level setting and making sure that everybody knows what we have in common in the room and what we're working toward, so that we can level out those power dynamics and stop trying to play with them.
It's funny when you're saying that, I'm thinking, well, like, teachers are, like you said, with managers too, teachers are hired because they're like masters in a certain subject or great with kids or whatever. Definitely not because they're like negotiators with parents.
Right. No teacher ever went into it saying, oh, I'm great at negotiating with parents.
Yeah. So what have you done in your role to have you ever like coached teachers on some of the tactics that you use for employee conversations?
Absolutely. It's funny. I lead a course on how to have difficult conversations with employees. And I am seeing more and more people coming into the course going, yeah, but can we talk about how to have them with parents? Because that's really where the problem's been lately.
Or maybe they're thinking, hey, I could use this with my spouse too.
Exactly. Well, one of the things I say is you can try these things out on your spouse, and when you see their eyes start twitching, you've got the right tone. But a lot of these are dynamics that they can be used in any difficult conversation. A lot of these techniques can be used in any conversation. The trick is understanding the power dynamics are different and making sure you're accounting for the changed power dynamics in other conversations. But a difficult conversation is a difficult conversation, whether that's having a conversation with your dad about the fact you need to take his keys, or whether it's having a conversation with your employee who's not doing what they need to be doing. Mm-hmm. It's the same techniques.
Yeah. Even in a classroom, I find, at least for me anyways, so many of the communication skills that I use to talk with my students are easily transferable here in my current role, because it's the same type of, hey, like we're all in this together. We're all working towards the same common goal, or this is an issue and it needs to be addressed, and this is how we're going to fix it. We're working together. So difficult conversations, I think the information you have about them can probably go towards any audience, really.
Yeah. And it's just a negotiation, but it's understanding what what works with people and what doesn't, what sounds like a threat, even if it wasn't intended that way. One of the first things you need to understand going into a difficult conversation is that impact matters, intention doesn't. Whatever your intention was really doesn't matter. It's how it landed with the person that matters, because that's what they're walking away with. And so if you didn't get the impact that you intended, that's on you. You can find a better way to phrase it. You can find a better way to say it, or you can find, sometimes it's your facial expressions, it's your body language. You need to be cognizant of everything you're relaying to them. I remember reading somewhere that only about 7% of what we convey to people in a conversation is actually conveyed with the words.
I read something just like that recently. Yeah, but it's such a great thing to think about.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's why the pandemic was so hard, because you were all on this tiny little Zoom screen, and most of the body language wasn't something we could see anymore.
Right.
We didn't understand
Just
each
the
other
fuzzy
anymore.
face. Yeah.
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 Yeah. Well, and there's that saying where it doesn't matter what you said, it matters what they heard.
That's right. It matters and I'll take that one step further. It matters how you made them feel. Mm-hmm. That's what they're going to remember. That's why I get hugs when they walk out of a difficult conversation with me, because they feel good, even if they got bad information. They feel like they were heard. Making sure that they feel heard, that you're not starting the conversation with, here's the expectation I'm setting for you. Mm-hmm. It's, let's talk this through. I'd like to hear your opinion. I'd like to hear what you experienced yesterday. How did this work for you? What were you doing? What were you thinking? Why did you take the actions you took? I had an employee once look at me when I sat down with him, and I asked him if he could walk me through the incident we were talking about, and he says, I was just a jerk. I'm sorry. I was just a jerk. Well, we just cut through a lot of layers here, because he was able to just say, you know what? I've already played this back in my head, and I know where this went wrong, and I know this was on me.
And you probably thought, this just went from an hour to 15 minutes.
That's right. Yeah. And it went from, we may be in a disciplinary situation, to this is a learning situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, he is clearly open to learning how to do this better. So let's be fluid in the conversation we're having and pivot when we need to. I know we all hate that word now, but pivot when we need to, and be able to respond to what they're saying in that moment and hear them. That's important in a difficult conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I'm feeling like I'm getting a lot of communication tips on this thing, and I don't work at a school, but I can imagine it's pretty useful for folks. So, Amber, where can people find you over the next coming year? Obviously, you do a lot of work with NBOA. You've got the big conference.
Yeah, I teach a lot of courses. If they go to NBOA.org, they can go to all of our programs. I teach a lot of courses. I teach a lot of workshops. So if you don't have time for a full course, but you can spare half a day, we've got that too. But also, I'm going to be at SAIS this year. I'm going to be at ISAS. See, we're
so
schools.
Many acronyms,
We've got
but
the
I'll try.
same
The
ones.
SAIS is Southern Association, right?
Yeah.
And what's the next one?
Independent Schools of the Southwest.
Okay, got it. So you're just kind of going on an American tour.
That's right.
Yeah, whole
That's
adventure.
right. And of course, I'll be at NBOA. I'll probably also do some joint work with NAIS. We always do joint work with NAIS, so I'm sure I will be there.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And finally, can you just tell everybody where you just got back from? Because we haven't had anybody who's gone there yet.
Yes.
It seems like everybody wants to talk about Ireland.
Oh, interesting. I just got back from my dream vacation. We went on safari in South Africa and Botswana.
Pretty awesome. They don't have the same animals in Ireland.
No, they don't. No,
So
they
what
don't.
was what was your favorite animal you saw?
Oh my goodness. I saw a rhinoceros. I didn't know that I was going to. I actually teared up a little bit when I saw one. We came over this little rise and there were 3 standing there, and it was just a dream come true. I felt like a little kid staring at my coloring book again.
What did you think when you saw, what was the most shocking thing about seeing them live?
They are absolutely built like tanks.
Yeah.
And as we were sitting there watching them, a very loud bird came flying in, and it scared them away.
That
my
is
gosh.
crazy.
And they're massive.
How did they move
Yeah,
when
I was
they?
gonna say, how did they run?
I think the word I would use is trundle. They looked kind of,
I can picture that.
they
Yeah.
weren't really running so much as trundling along.
Yeah, that makes sense though. Like if a tank had legs,
That's right.
It's kind of going to be.
And to be scared of a bird was just so funny
Yeah.
to me.
How far away were you from them, like when you saw them?
I was probably about 20 feet away from them when they got scared away.
Is a lot closer than I would have thought.
Yeah.
But so everybody goes on. Is it like a convoy type of thing?
We were just in a Jeep. It was me and my husband and a tracker and a guide, and we were
Oh
sitting in
wow,
the
you
Jeep.
had a personal, up close and personal experience.
Wow.
Yeah,
Oh.
but we
That's
were
very
very
cool.
close to most of the animals. It was so exciting.
Yeah.
That's
but
really
to
cool.
see those moments where the animals are just being themselves, as opposed to looking at them in a book or being in a zoo where they're not really able to show those natural behaviors was
Right.
really incredible.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's one of my dream vacations also.
That would be cool.
was
Someday
incredible.
I'll leave the country, you know.
Yeah. Well, you did take your first plane ride recently, right? A couple of years ago?
No, that was the first time I left the time zone.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I've lived a dull life.
Well, Amber, thanks so much for coming on the Checkwriters podcast. We really appreciate it. Learned a lot of stuff, and we'll look forward to the coming school year.
Awesome.
Yes.
Thank you for the invite. This was really incredible.
Yeah, thank
Yes,
you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Checkwriters. Be sure to follow us on Apple, YouTube, or wherever you view your favorite podcasts. Stay tuned for future episodes where we'll continue to uncover the secrets behind successful organizations.